So sloth, right. So we had a problem in my house with rats last year. They seem to kind of return every 5 years or so. And you know because you hear them at night in the walls, and they leave little presents for you in the morning, you know. And so we had to do something about this. And rats are notoriously hard to get rid of. I mean, you go on the website and everybody's got a theory, everybody's got an approach. They've got the boxes that are like little homes where you lure them in and they zap them with electricity. And then you've got these things you can put in the walls. You plug them in, they almost look like those aroma things that you plug in and make your house smell nice, except these emit a very high-pitched whine that you can barely, if the house is totally quiet, you can hear it. But apparently for rats, it's like, ah! It's really loud. For somehow they have those kind of ears. So some people are devotees of the sound approach, not the zap approach. But but these are expensive, I mean, if you're going to really deal with the rat thing. So I decided to go with the old-fashioned, Wile E. Coyote, Roadrunner, thing. Where you pull it back and just zap. I think, they're $2 at Ace Hardware. And, I had incredible success. I mean, it became kind of a game. You put these on the floor, and even I would wake up in the night, I'd hear something, I'd rush out there, and victory, and, he'd be... I know, it's a little bit morbid, but rats are gross, I don't want them. And so I'd be catching 1, 2, 3 in a night, take them out of the trash. And, but they just kept coming. I mean, they just kept coming, no matter how many I would kill. And I was like 20, 23, 24, 25. I was way up there in my body count, but it was, they just kept coming. And by the way, if you want to know eventually what worked for us is coyote urine. Coyote urine. So that's a tip. You got to sprinkle it kind of under the house or wherever you think they're coming from, and coyote would be a natural predator for the rat, and so they smell that and they think a coyote is they think we own a coyote. Not as smart as they look. And so they get out of town. So that worked for us. But, for me, that was kind of a metaphor for sin. So we're in this series on the deadly sins, and, this is not the approach that is tempting to take is that our job is to stamp out sin. That we can just do sin management. If we can just stop sinning, kind of just stop it. And, of course, you're called to do that. You're called to stop sinning and repent. And so every time a sin comes up, you're just called to stop it. But here's the problem. It's hard to stop it if there's something below ground generating those sins. Like those rats. I could try and kill as many of those rats every time they pop up as I can. I could try kind of manage it. But if there's something generating them below, no matter how many times you try to push down from the top, you still need to address what's underneath. Or else the rats will just keep coming. And so in terms of spiritual formation, in terms of our formation, sin is, of course, about stopping the actual behavior. But the problem is that the root problem is not usually behavioral. It's something deeper. It's relational. It's in the heart. Something, and not coyote urine, is after going to go lower in us to figure out what's going on there. And of course, Christianity is not just about sinning. As we sang in that lost song, it's about doing the will of God. So even when we talk about this issue of sinning, this is not kind of the end of the Christian life is to stop sinning. That is a means to allow us to do the will of God. That's what we're about. We want to do the will of God with joy in union with Him. And the reason why we talk about sin, and have to talk about it, is because it gets in the way of doing the will of God with joy. See, spiritual formation is often about removing things that are in the way. I mean, you have all you need. You've got the Scriptures. You've got the Spirit. You've got the church. You've got knowledge. In a sense, you have all you need, and so the riddle is, why do we keep on sinning? Well, something has to be removed. Something has to be dealt with at a deeper level. So this is all by way of preface to say that our discussions of sin are not about just sin management from above. And it's not because Christianity is about morality, it's not. It's about doing the will of God, which, however, forces us to talk about sin. because it's what gets in the way. So last week, Dennis Alcom talked about the 7 deadly sins, which originally called 8 deadly thoughts, and they were at some point by Gregory the Great, they became 7 instead of 8. And the reason why they're called deadly is because they used to be called capital sins. And there was a little confusion there because capital sounded like capital punishment and therefore deadly. And of course they are deadly, especially if they become a rhythm, as Dennis said. But the reason why these were kind of identified from the scriptures as the kind of 7 deadly sins is because there was a sense in which all the other sins kind of come from these. These are kind of the core things in our hearts that generate all these others. And so they became these important kind of foci for sin. And so today we're going to talk about sloth, which is one of the 7 deadly thoughts or sins. And of course, sloth, you may automatically know, has a connection to laziness. It's a kind of spiritual listlessness. And really, it's a refusal to do what we ought to be doing. Or put it another way, sloth is that sin that keeps us from doing what God is calling us to do in the present moment. Sloth is the sin that keeps us from doing what God is calling us to do in the present moment. And so here are some symptoms in my life, and you may recognize these. These would be symptoms of sloth. So you're studying, right? You're writing a paper, you're reading, you're researching, and you think, I would almost rather read anything else than what I'm reading now. So there I was working on my dissertation. I remember I was in the bottom of the UC Irvine library where I was, where was I? I forget which library I was in, but I was studying knee-deep, neck-deep in my dissertation, which was on Victorian literature. My PhD is in English literature. I've been an English professor here for a long time. And I remember looking up on the stacks above me and looking at a book on Roman coins, thinking, that looks really interesting. Roman coins, hello. I pulled the book down, read a couple chapters. I would read anything besides what I was supposed to be reading then. That would be a sign of sloth. I just want to get away from what I'm reading. I'll even read about Roman coins, which had zero to do with my interest or dissertation. Oh, here's another thing I do. Another symptom of sloth. I begin dreaming about future projects. I've got tons on my plate. I've got plenty of projects going right now, but I begin dreaming, but I could do this, and I could do that. Because, new things, new ministries, new projects, they are shiny and new. And the stuff I'm working on is kind of dull and familiar. So I'm frequently given to fantasizing about the future rather than staying in the present. That would be a sign of sloth. If you've said yes to too many things and you find yourself overwhelmed now, you're too busy, that often is a sign of sloth, believe it or not. If you're too busy, strangely, that's a sign of sloth. If you're bored with your life, and you find yourself just moving from one entertainment option to the next, if you move through all 6 seasons of Lost in a week on DVD, and you suddenly wake up after 5 or 6 hours of entertainment, you go, what have I been doing? I've just been wasting my time watching these shows end to end. Well, that's a sign of sloth. If you've changed your major 3 times or more already, that's a sign of sloth. I did that at my university. It was so easy to change majors, it was ridiculous. So I'd go to class, I'd get a bad grade in a paper, I'd go, you know what, I don't think I'm cut out for this. Again, another well-made decision. I'd say, can I please have my file? They would hand me my file, I'd sign a piece of paper, I would walk my file over to another department, and they're all on this big quad, so it was like, there they all are. It's like, which one do I want? How about that one? And I'd walk it over, give it to them, I'd sign a paper, they'd hand me an advisor, I'd change majors. I did that more than 3 times. How about this one? You want new friends. I just want new friends. It's so nice to have new friends. Because the old friends know me a little too well. They see the ways I'm stuck. They know all my sins. I'm not quite as impressive anymore. I want new friends. New friends think I'm cool and impressive. My old friends kind of know me. Well, that would be a sign of sloth. How about you if you've stopped praying or are really restless in prayer? You'd rather do anything else besides pray. You want to just do something. I don't want to pray, I want to do something. Strangely, that would be a sign of sloth. Or if you keep avoiding something you should be doing, some act of service you know that God has called you to, some nagging relational issue that needs repair, some task that needs to be done. If you find yourself continually putting that off, of course, that would be a sign of sloth. And if you find yourself just generally numbing yourself through whatever means we numb ourselves, that would be a sign of sloth. These are all symptoms of sloth. And if you'll notice, again, the strange thing is, while we think of sloth as laziness, actually that doesn't really capture the definition of sloth completely. Because sloth can not only manifest itself in laziness, but in busyness. And that's kind of the mind bender. That busyness or frantic activity can be a sign of sloth as well. Because ultimately what sloth is avoidance. And we can avoid things by being lazy, and we can avoid things by being busy. But the core problem with sloth is that we just want to avoid. We just want to be somewhere else, do something else, be someone else. And in fact, that is probably some ways to think of it as having a time dimension and a space dimension and an identity dimension. Time. I don't want to be doing this now. I want to be doing this tomorrow. And we know what that word's called. Anybody? If you don't want to do today, you want to do tomorrow, what are you doing? Thank you very much. You're procrastinating, which literally means, pro means forward, crass, and this doesn't work, means tomorrow, just to put off till tomorrow. Procrastinating. That would be a sign of sloth. We do it in space, though, too. I don't want to be here. I want to be someplace else. I want to be someplace more exotic than the library. I want to go someplace other than La Mirada, which, by the way, means the view. I'm not sure what view they're talking about. I think there's a thing in Southern California where you name things after what you had to kill to make the city. So, Orange County. I don't see a lot of oranges. Fountain Valley, no fountains. Hawaiian Gardens. I don't see any Hawaiian Gardens. Anyway. That's called wanderlust. Wanderlust is the desire to be someplace else rather than you are. It's this romantic notion that the grass is always going to be greener someplace else. If I was just someplace else, then all would be better. You know, there's a thing called the sophomore slump. Are you guys aware of this? It's an enrollment management term. And every university has discovered that at the end of sophomore year, students are... Any sophomores here? Okay. So this, you can see if this is true of you. The sophomore slump is that toward the end of the sophomore year, things get kind of hard. The newness and shininess of the university is worn off. I'm now having to deal with what exactly am I going to major in. And there becomes this kind of wanderlust. It is the time, if there are transfers, it is the time, particular time, when students at every university transfer into their sophomore year. If they're going to transfer, they transfer then. Because, I want a new place. Well, that would be a sign of sloth in many cases. So not only do we don't want to do it now, we don't want to be here now, and we don't even want to be ourselves. Kierkegaard says that this idea of sloth, or what's sometimes called akidia, is I don't want to be who I am. I want to be someone else. And last week, Dennis Ockham said that often the capital sins go in pairs. Last week, he paired anger and lust, because when I lust and I don't get what I want, I become angry. Well, the pairing for sloth would be envy. I want to be someone else. I don't want to be who God made me. I want to avoid me. I'm tired of me. I don't believe God is working in me. The whole advertising industry is designed to make you feel this way. In fact, anything that they sell you, they're trying to make you feel that these people on the TV are having more fun in life than you are. They're happier because they eat this yogurt. They're trying to make you unsettled. So what then is at the root of sloth? What will we say is sloth in the end, or at the root? It's literally a loss of care. It's apathy. It's apatheia in the Greek. Pathos means to have passion. You put an alpha in front of it. It's called the alpha privative. It negates it. It's a lack of passion, a lack of care for something. That is what sloth is. We've lost the point of whatever it is that we're called to do. In fact, we've lost God's point. We don't know why this is God's will for us anymore. We don't see the will of God, and sometimes we just don't care about the will of God anymore in a particular activity. And again, studying is a good example. I'm sure there are times in your academic career that you've had already when you're studying and you say to yourself, you don't even say to yourself, you're just feeling, I would rather be doing anything else right now than studying. I don't see the connection anymore. I mean, especially if it's like a GE course, it's like, I don't care. I don't see what God's will could possibly be for me. Again, it's not so much something we say to ourselves. Probably be good if we said it to ourselves, because then we would pray it through. But it's usually just a feeling where we have lost the connection about why this matters. We don't care anymore about it. And so we want to get away from it. We've lost the vision of how God might use this time of studying. We've lost the visions of Philippians 1:9, which says, and this is Paul's prayer, that your love may abound more and more in knowledge and depth of insight. So we've lost that vision. That we're here to learn how to love, and often learn how to love requires a depth of insight and a depth of knowledge. And so we're in a class, and we've lost that vision. See, this is God's will. God's will, the goal of our instruction, says 1 Timothy 1:5, is love. The goal of your instruction is love. We've lost the vision. We can't connect anymore. How is studying related to love? Why does love require knowledge and discernment as well? We've lost the vision. We've lost meaning. And of course, that is what apathy is. It just doesn't mean anything anymore. We've lost the connection of what makes this valuable. The busier you get, by the way, the less time you have to create meaning. Sometimes, don't you know that as you're moving through your life, occasionally it's just so refreshing to sit down with your journal and say, why again am I doing what I'm doing? You and I are meaning-making creatures. In order to value something, we need to make those connections. We need to understand why this is meaningful. And the busier you and I become, the less time we have to make those connections, and the more we fall into a kind of apathy. You know, we live in a whole culture of apathy. We live in a whole culture of sloth. The larger culture cannot make sense of their lives. They really can't find the meaning to what they're doing. But instead of falling into a laziness, although some do fall into depression, depression today is the largest illness worldwide. It is responsible for the most medical problems worldwide. What does that tell you? You know, I realize there's often a chemical component to depression, and that's real. And that needs to be treated accordingly. But there is also the spiritual sense, and of course we know that body and spirit work together to a sense that a person cannot create a meaningful existence is the degree that they may fall into depression, and that may change their chemistry, and just to get even, they have to get their chemistry back up so they can even deal with the question of meaning. But this is why in contemporary culture it not only manifests itself in depression, but in frantic busyness. In the frantic turning of one entertainment option to another, of always being plugged in, of always being digital, of always being on a screen, because they are scared to death that silence may just remind them that they have no idea why they're doing what they're doing. And they become frantic because they haven't understood what they really need to care about. They are casting about for something to care. So the first root of apathy or sloth is apathy. Not remembering what it is we should be caring about, what God's will is for us. The second root is fear. Often we avoid what we need to do because we fear it won't make us happy. We fear it won't fulfill us. We fear that it won't further us. I think that's been one of my issues. I often avoid things because I think, well, is this really going to further me? And if I go perform this act of service, it's going to take away from my career, and I want to have a career, I want to become somebody. And I feel like if I devote myself to this person, if I sit with this person, if I do this act of service, it will pull me away. And my fear is that I'll become nothing. And so sloth actually is a form of self-love. Sloth is saying, I'm not going to care about what I should do. I'm going to do what I want to do to get what I need. And so if sloth is avoidance, what we're doing is we're avoiding God's will to pursue our own, because we fear if we don't pursue our will, we will not get what we want. So at the root of sloth is a kind of fear that if we do it God's way, we won't get what we want. Well, of course, the kind of fear we want to have is the fear of God, which says, Lord, it's a reverential fear. It's called, Thomas Aquinas calls this fear filial fear, the love of a parent and their will. Well, that's the kind of fear we want to have, and say, God, what do you really care about? Because I don't want to fall into sloth. I want to really care about what I should be caring about. I want to really value myself, not out of self-love that takes me from your will, but I want to value what you're doing in my life, even if it looks a little bit mundane. Even if it looks like studying, Lord, I want to care about that the way that you care about that. See, fear becomes a kind of sadness. And that used to be, by the way, the 8th deadly sin or thought, sadness. It's a despair that God's will, it's a despair of God's will. I don't care anymore about God's will, or I don't see how what I'm doing now matches up with God's will. And what Gregory did is he took sloth and sadness and put them into one. But I think it's useful to separate it back out. Sadness is a kind of despair at doing God's will in the place you are, at the time you are, and the person you are. And so fear is at the root of God's will. And ironically, the opposite of sloth is not productivity. It's not being industrious. It's not getting busy for Jesus. That is not the opposite of sloth. You know what the opposite of sloth is? It's rest. Wrap your mind around that for a moment. The opposite of sloth is rest, because what it says is, Lord, I am in this place right now. You've called me to these people, to this daily task, to these things, and I'm going to rest in this will for me, that you are going to use this in my life and use this in the lives of others. I don't have to create my own will to get what I want. I don't have to fear that I'll become nothing. I can rest in your will for me today where I am. The opposite of sloth is rest. Resting in God's will for me right now, rather than frantically casting about for something else. So how do we combat sloth? Well, let me just give you a few things to end on. With perseverance. With perseverance. Listen to some of these passages. Hebrews 10:36. You need to persevere so that when you have done the will of God, you will receive what he has promised. James 1:12. Blessed is the one who perseveres under trial. Sloth is a kind of trial. It's a trial of fear. So that those who persevere under trial, having stood the test, will receive the crown of life that the Lord has promised to those who love him. 2 Thessalonians 3:4. We have confidence in the Lord that you are doing and will continue to do the things we command you. May the Lord direct your hearts into God's love and Christ's perseverance. See those pairing? Into God's love and Christ's perseverance. God loves you. He has the best for you. The things that you know he's given you now to do can be trusted. And so we need to rediscover God's will so we can have God's love so we can have Christ's perseverance. And the word perseverance actually is hypomene in the Greek, hupomene. It means to stay under. To stay under the yoke. Hupo means under, like hypodermic needle. Mene is part of remain. To remain under. So one way we combat sloth? Well, you know what? At times when you're feeling like you can't make the connections, when you're tired of being the person you are or doing what God has essentially given you to do, even if it's very mundane, don't make a big decision at that point. Don't pull your file out of one department and walk it across the quad to the other department. But for the time being, remain under it and try to make the connection. And that would be the second thing. Not only to remain under, not only don't act rashly at these times of sloth, remain under, but then seek vision. Seek to make the connection. Lord, why are you having me studying this right now? Why am I in this job right now? Why am I in this place right now? Ask God for vision for why this is his will for you. Talk with others. Talk with your professors. Why am I studying the nature of math? I'm an art major. Give me a vision for how this could be God's will for me. Lord, why am I stuck in this ministry where people are just arguing with each other? I want to go to some place that's shiny and new and easier. Lord, what's the vision here? Help me make the connection. So the first thing is, don't flee the situation right away. Hupomene, stay under the yoke of it. And then ask God for vision. Lord, how is this your will? Because I want to care about what you care about. And the third thing would be act. Move yourself back into it. Lead with the body. Do what you're called to do today and let God meet you there, staying open to what his will for you is in that situation. I don't know if we'd call it a leap of faith as much as a leap of trust. Sit in it. Faith is often compared to a chair. We have to sit in it to see that, wow, this is exactly where I should be. So continue to act with what God's given you to act on. And then pray. Memorize Psalm 51, 10-12. Lord, create in me a pure heart. You know what pure means? It means single-minded. Lord, I want to do your will. And often his will is not a mystery to us when we take it on a daily basis. You know what God's will is for you today. I imagine you have classes to go to. I imagine you have people you're meeting with. I imagine there's ways that God wants you to take care of yourself. God's will on a daily basis is not usually a mystery. Oh, if we think about the future, yeah, there's some clouds there, but on a daily basis, not.
We hope you enjoyed this message. Biola University offers a variety of biblically centered degree programs, ranging from business to ministry to the arts and sciences. Learn more at biola.edu.